welcome to the Brickdale Visiting Writer Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker. I'm an associate professor in the English department here, and I also run our creative writing program. I am very excited to have on the show today a wonderful, important, young, new voice in poetry. Her name is Blythe Baird. She is a poet, a youth educator, and an actress. His work has been featured in Glamour, Huffington Post, and many other publications. Her film and activist work has been recognized in various national competitions and in venues. She recently graduated from Hamline University with her bachelor's, and her first book is called If My Body Could Speak. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
You know, often I find a table of contents to be relatively useless in a book. You know, I'm on an editorial board for a press, and gosh, I probably shouldn't say that, but usually there's not much that you get out of it. But your table of contents is wonderful. I mean, you have When the Fat Girl Gets Skinny, Dress Code, High School, Beauty Revelation, Skirt Steak Girls, Class Clown. You know, I could keep going, but like a person builds, and I have a sense of time and place and a character just from your table of contents.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. And it makes me wonder, where do you get your poems from?
So all of my poems are rooted in personal experience. I came into writing as a way to let the experiences I had gone through live outside of my body, which is what poetry always was for me. So I get my inspiration from moments. Something will happen that'll startle me, that'll make me think of how it plays into something larger that this moment is just an example of. So yeah, I got most of my inspiration in high school and college. My high school experience was absolutely wacky. I watched so much misogyny, sexism, racism. I watched excuse me, so much go down at my school. Like, for example, we had this class called Living on Your Own, but nothing we learned was about living on your own. We learned like what makes a wedding ring tacky versus not tacky. We had to make like wanted posters of all the physical attributes we want in our future husbands. We had to watch the movie He's Just Not That Into You.
You are kidding.
No, I am 1,000% serious, at a public school just outside of Chicago. So I was like, whoa, this stuff is wild. Yeah.
Holy crap.
And
seriously?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm so floored.
And
wow.
the biggest hullabaloo of that class was that at the end of the semester, there was always this mock wedding where like David's Bridal would donate a tux and a dress, and like 2 students would have to pick like groomsmen and bridesmaids. But my senior year, when I was in it, the only 2 boys we had in the class dropped out like a couple days in because they were like, I'm not learning about wedding rings. So we had an all-girls class. And then my teacher was like, well, we have no boys, we can't do the wedding. Now, I was against the wedding from the start, but I didn't want us to not do the wedding because we didn't have boys in the class. So I was like, let's have a gay wedding. It was like 2 weeks after gay marriage was legalized in Illinois. And it was a big fuss. She was like, we can't do that. First of all, that would be offensive to actual gay people. All of these whole things. And my classmates,
in contrast to the entire class being offensive.
Exactly, in general. And I was like, well, we were gonna have a fake straight wedding, and you didn't think that was gonna be offensive to straight people. But yeah, my classmates didn't really back me up. But that was just one example of the holistic experience of my high school was bizarre. And so that was a big motivator for me, because I was just kind of coming into like feminism and things like that. I hadn't heard of anything like that until later in high school. So when I was kind of opening my eyes to that, it just kind of illuminated what was going on around me, which felt very important to record at the time. And that mindset came with me to college, where my kind of field research then was more so in personal interactions with people, students, friends. So that was where I drew most of my inspiration from, was just being shocked at how things were.
I'm still relatively speechless. Holy smokes. You said that you were already writing poetry by the time you were in high school?
Sort of. So I started writing poetry when I was in high school. I was about 15 when I saw Writers Week, which was this thing we had at our school where they brought in different writers and poets to speak and, you know, read from their books and that kind of thing. And I had never like heard of spoken word or slam poetry. The only point of reference I really had was that people snapped and maybe wore berets. That was like all I really knew. But I saw this spoken word poet, Sierra DeMulder, who's now my mentor, but at the time I saw her and she performed this poem called Anna, and it was about anorexia, which I was deeply struggling with at the time. And one of the lines in it was like, your body is not a temple, your body is the house you grew up in. How dare you try to burn it to the ground? And 15-year-old me was just shook. So I didn't really know what she was doing, or I didn't know to call it spoken word. But I was like, whatever she's doing, that's what I want to do, because it's not that she made me recover in that moment, but the way that her poem made me feel for the first time made me feel like someday I might want to recover. And so that made me be very interested in what spoken word poetry is. And then I didn't write a poem until the following year when I went to slam poetry camp, which Sierra was an educator.
I was going to say, there's a
at.
camp?
Yeah, yep. And then I later went on to be a junior counselor at the same camp. But I went to the camp for 2 years straight as just a camper. And at the first year, so when I was 16, is when I wrote my first poem. And I learned actually poetry as slam. I learned writing for the most part as competition, as performing. So that always also informed my writing, because I knew I was going to be reading it on stage, not something someone was just going to have in their hands. So
yeah, for people who may not be aware, what is slam poetry? Because there's there's the page poets, and then there's the performance. Or do you prefer slam? Because there's different.
Well, so I believe, and this is just my personal belief, I believe that slam and spoken word are two different things that are often used interchangeably. So there's spoken word poets, right, and there's spoken word poems. I don't think slam poetry within itself is a genre. I believe slam is a competition. So you can read a spoken word poem at a slam, but it's not like a slam poem. You know, you can read anything within the span of 3 minutes and call it a poem. So yeah, I definitely think of slam as the actual competition, and then anything else would be like a spoken word show or something like that.
Gotcha. So what are the rules of this competition then?
Yeah, so it's pretty strict actually. So you have 3 minutes to perform an original piece. You can have no costumes, props, musical accompaniments, anything else. And yeah, if you go over time, there's a 10-second grace period after the 3-minute thing, but if you go over time, then you start to lose points in your overall score. And then in the audience, there's 5 random judges. The only qualifications you have to be a judge are to not be affiliated with anyone in the competition. And then each judge gives each poem a score out of 10. And then the highest and the lowest scores are dropped. Middle 3 are added together to give you a score out of 30. And then there's rounds and all of that.
And this is enormous. I mean, there's national poetry slam competitions.
Right.
Have you participated in those?
Yes, very much so. After I wrote my first poems at Slam Camp, I tried out for the spoken word team in Chicago, like the adult team the following year.
Which is one of the teams.
Yeah,
yeah,
it was wild. It was super exciting. But I actually, when I made the team, it was really cool because you had to be 18 to compete at nationals, and I happened to turn 18 the first day of the competition. So I was the youngest poet there, and which was a very interesting experience. But I went on to do nationals many years after that, both in Chicago and in Minnesota, and did regional competitions like Rust Belt, did final stage at Rust Belt, and yeah, I haven't slammed in I think a couple years now, but when I was doing it, I was doing it.
Yeah. It's definitely a world that that kind of wraps people up, because there are so many. It's international. It's got huge followings.
Totally.
So I wonder, so you came to poetry as a spoken word artist.
Yes.
How would you define the difference then between that, say, because your book, here it is it's not a CD.
Right.
Not that anyone does CDs really that much anymore, but what would you define as the difference, or what are the differences?
So I think that a book of spoken word poetry are poems that can live both on the page and the stage, but lend themselves more to stage. But I find with my book, I have a lot of page poems in there too, ones that aren't necessarily like, you know, slammy. But yeah, so I think they can all coexist. But I definitely, when I'm writing a page poem, I'm less concerned with how it will appear to the ear. Whereas when I'm writing a spoken word poem, I'm consciously writing it both for the page and for an audience at the same time.
That's interesting. So do you know that you said, when I'm writing a page poem, I know I don't need to be as aware of this. So
Right.
do you know when you start writing?
Yes. So
Wow.
the way that I write my spoken word poems
Yeah.
is there'll be a larger message that I'm trying to articulate through whatever I'm talking about. There'll be a turning point, very similar to how creative nonfiction is. I learned in my creative nonfiction class what they call the triggering subject and the real subject is oftentimes what spoken word, we'll call like the hook and the thesis. But so I'll know when I'm doing a poem with the specific purpose to get an audience to take away something larger. Whereas when I'm writing page poems, I either don't know what they're going to be, maybe they'll become spoken word poems, but for the most part when I'm writing page poems, that's when I'm just dissecting myself, when I'm just writing something that is exclusively for me, and I kind of give myself a little bit more freedom to be less performative with it in terms of linguistic to the ear, that type of deal.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Thanks.
And so from the very beginning, you kind of have a sense of this is going to this audience. So what are some of the things that then you, if it is going to be a spoken word poem, are you really attuned to?
Yeah, so I'll just use an example. So probably my most known poem is When the Fat Girl Gets Skinny. And with that particular poem, I knew that I had this experience of being celebrated and congratulated for an unhealthy weight loss. And I knew I wanted to write something that illuminated why that was harmful. That didn't just say like, hey, I was congratulated, but it's like, and this is what that did for me. This is what that then caused to grow within me. So does that answer that question a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. I think it's really interesting because I think so many writers sit down and kind of see what happens, but to know that you sit really very much with an intention. I'm going outward on this versus this one's about me, and I'm going to give myself permission to look inward, be quieter possibly.
Sure.
And that must feel. Does that feel freeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll do it both ways, I think that it actually does feel more freeing to sit down without an intention, but it makes me feel out of control, whereas I've always learned, like I said, writing for the intention of showing it to people, so I think that in that way it's easier because it anchors me to a structure.
Gotcha, you've got a place that you're moving towards.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Well, we got to move towards break.
Yes. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And we will be right back. Thanks. Bye.
They come to Brookdale with a passion for healthcare, cybersecurity, fashion merchandising. They graduate and transfer to universities like Georgetown, NJIT, and the Fashion Institute of Technology. They begin their careers as registered nurses, security engineers, and fashion designers. This is what success looks like. And here is where it all starts. This is Brookdale. College redefined, success reimagined. Take your next step at brookdalecc.edu. In today's workforce, competition is fierce. If you need a competitive edge, earn a credential that sets you apart and brings you closer to your goals. At Brookdale, we offer a variety of short-term certifications in a wide range of fields. From social media and architecture to culinary arts and cybersecurity, we help you get trained, get certified, and get ahead. This is Brookdale. College redefined, success reimagined. Take your next step at brookdalecc.edu.
Brookdale Community College, the power to provide accessibility to over 60 degree and certification classes on campus and online, to provide a rich community of faculty and student life, to provide affordability through financial aid, scholarships, and grants. Brookdale Community College, the power to provide you the access, affordability, and community to reach your education goals. Brookdale Community College.
Hi, and welcome back to the Brookdale Visiting Writer Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker, and I'm here today talking with a wonderful spoken word artist and poet, Blythe Baird. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I wondered, you mentioned your mentor. Were there people who influenced you or inspired you as you were entering into the scene?
Yeah, absolutely. So many people. I felt very raised by my elders in spoken word and slam. I felt super guided by many people, Sierra DeMulder, C.R. Freeman, Kwabena Foley. I had just really good mentors always.
Yeah, because you're on teams, or it would seem to be that would be part of what the world is, kind of, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the teams, and then also just in general, slam and spoken word is a small world, and a lot of people are connected to each other, and so it was very natural for me to meet people who were doing the same thing.
That? Okay. Well, I wonder, would you share a poem with us?
I sure will. All right. Perhaps this body belongs to the first time I was raped. And I think about how awful it is to begin a sentence with the first time I was raped. And how when I talk to other women about this, it almost seems like it's not even if you've been assaulted, but when. See, women have so much in common, such as loving Zumba, being interrupted, experiencing violence. And when another male friend turns out to be a rapist, the same male friend who wore feminism across his chest like a pageant sash, I cannot help but remember meeting him at a sexual violence prevention rally and the disappointing irony. And when another male friend who identifies as a feminist gives himself permission to make the rape joke and has the nerve to call it reclamatory, never mind that the joke just validated the actions of the silent predator sitting next to him. Never mind that the joke just made a survivor across from him relive what was likely the worst thing to ever happen to them. And you men who pose as activists scratch your head, wonder why women are so terrified to report while you shrug your shoulders and make our trauma into your victory lap the reason you fist bump your friends over craft beers at the bar. How could I expect this body to be perfect for anything but the punchline? And if I don't laugh, I am no longer the cool girl, but the one who can't take a joke. I have run out of compassion for wolves. I have run out of compassion for anyone who isn't outraged. I ran, and this stubborn body followed. I am the opposite of forgiveness. I am all rage and shriek and flame. Outside of the women's freshman dormitory at Yale, fraternity pledges chanted, no means yes, yes means anal. I fuck dead women and fill them with my semen. A woman is found unconscious behind a dumpster, pine needles matted in her hair, naked, wounded, violated by a star Stanford athlete. Meanwhile, the press is more concerned with how this experience has taken away her assailant's appetite. This is not to say all men are hungry. This is not even to say all men are hunting. But haven't we all found the bones of a woman stuck like leftovers between a full man's teeth? There is a fraternity in Minnesota that paints the stone lions outside their front door the color of the panties of the last girl they successfully assaulted. You call this rape culture? I call it this morning. I was harassed 4 times on the way here. If my trauma were made into an art museum, the most popular exhibit would showcase portraits of every man who has ever assaulted me snarling, and the smell of his sweat on my pillowcase follows me to sociology, and the whole class can tell that most days I am more victim than I am survivor. In this room, I try to write a poem about anything other than my sexual assault, but all that comes out is my throat and his hands. A few hours before one of my best friends raped me on our college campus, we talked about astral projection. He couldn't understand why I wanted to experience it so badly. Why would anyone want to leave their body? He laughed. And in this moment, we had nothing in the world in common.
Wow. What a powerful poem.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you.
Now, I would think that was probably a performance poem.
It was.
Yeah. So thank you for doing it while sitting
Yes.
down. It was wonderful. The book, If My Body Could Speak, maybe you could speak to some of the subjects and the themes in the book.
Sure. So the main themes that I work with are, of course, sexual assault, healing from sexual assault, experiencing an eating disorder and healing from that, and sexuality and navigating my mother's response to kind of all of those things, which definitely shaped a lot of me. But I find that almost everything I write about in some way, shape, or form comes back to the body as some sort of portal or space that something else can happen. So yeah.
And you said that a lot of your poems are stemming from your own personal experiences
Yes.
and your own background. I mean, this is tough stuff.
Sure.
You know, the I don't even know, what was it called? The How to Get Married class? Or
Yeah.
whatever that
Living on your
ridiculousness.
own.
Oh, God. You know, there's a certain amount of just shock and like amusement out of the ridiculousness of that. But this is tough stuff. How do you take that kind of personal experience and shape it into art?
Well, when I write these poems, it's healing for me because it feels like then they're not living in me and they're something that I made out of it. It allows me to almost categorize these things and be able to move forward because I could name it. And then it doesn't become something I'm constantly reliving. It becomes a performance that I put on so people feel less alone. They're things I've already healed from, you know, but I wrote a lot of these poems I wrote when I was still in high school or early college. So the fact that I feel confident in being able to go in front of people and talk about things that a lot of people are really afraid to talk about, I feel like is something that is special. And so it's really healing for me to be able to let them live as poems, and then I can kind of move forward once they are.
What are some of the strategies that you use? Because I mean, these are poems. There's a great deal of controlled anger and outrage in this book. And what I really appreciated in the poems were, I mean, this book could have been shrieking at the top of its lungs, but it's not. There's an enormous amount of restraint, but yet, again, an intensity to it. And I wonder how you, especially in these longer poems, how you modulate.
Yeah, so the way that I learned to write poems is to start with the experience itself, then dig into that experience to find a larger, more universal meaning, and then write a couple hit lines, and then.
What do you mean hit lines?
Like your mic drop lines, right? Like just hard hitting, whatever. Sprinkle some of those in, that an image that can really articulate the message. A couple different images, and then I fill in the rest of the poem like shading in a sketch.
Interesting. So this was something you've taught. Like, here's the, I don't want to say the word formula, but here's the pattern.
Sure. And I teach it just because that's how I learned it, you know. And it definitely doesn't. Following a formula that specific definitely doesn't resonate with everyone, and it just worked for me. It just, the way my brain works is very into categories, and so it just made sense for my brain.
When you hear other poets perform theirs, can you hear that structure in theirs as well too, sometimes? Often, in different ways. But I think a lot of times, even though I do think a lot of spoken word poems sound similar, I can also see how people just truly really make it their own, because with something as vague as starting with the experience and digging for the greater meaning, you know, like that can be extended in so many different ways. So I think it shows up differently for everyone, even though it often is a similar formula that people follow. Do you have poems that sometimes you feel you have to pull back on, that they're coming on too strong?
Yes, particularly when I find my almost like spoken word voice creeping into an essay or a page poem. I kind of dial myself back just for the sake of letting myself marinate in a topic without having to pull out a larger point. The marination in the topic can be the point. It can be a meditation on it. It doesn't, not everything has to be a dagger, you know?
Yes. So did you find that there's a lot of crossover, or that you could really separate these into the two different camps?
There's crossover in terms of the topics, but in terms of the structure, I feel like they're two different camps.
What has performing taught you in connection to your page poetry, and vice versa?
Performing has taught me to be economical with my language, to know when you only have 3 minutes to perform, it makes you really make some strong choices about what you're going to keep in and what doesn't serve the narrative. So the fact that I can take that for when I'm working on page poems, it makes me be more concise with my language. It makes me be more motivated to articulate what I'm saying in a way that's clear, concise, effective, artistic, even without the 3-minute limit, I could still kind of apply that idea.
Gotcha, gotcha. What do you hope people take from your work?
I hope people feel moved by my work in the way I felt moved by Sierra's work. I want them to take away the power in being able to emote, to be able to connect with someone else, and to be able to own and articulate your experiences without letting shame eclipse them.
Yeah, and you're an educator as well too. Yeah, who do you teach?
I work with students aged 13 to 17.
Gotcha. And are you teaching slam poetry?
Yeah, I teach intro to spoken word and poetry slam, so I get them ready to compete if they want to do that. But I also always tell them, I think it's hard. People often will refer to slam as like a trauma Olympics. So I always try to teach my students never to like break themselves open to get the poem. You don't have to like force yourself to be like re-traumatized to get something worth writing about. Any moment can be a poem if you hold it right. That's not a quote from me, but I forgot who said it, but I believe that.
It's a good one. Well, I mean, especially because the stuff you're dealing with in the book is traumatic, but what I hear you saying is it's important to work it from a safe space when you're ready to share it. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And will you be reading from the book and kind of doing some other kind of slam stuff in the near future?
I will.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, hopefully you've got a website?
I do, BlytheBaird.com.
There we go. So please check out Blythe's website, and also please as well get the wonderful book. And thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
If you want to know more about Brookdale's Creative Writing Program, our Visiting Writer Series, or our classes, which are all open to the community, please check out the creative writing options here at Brookdale, and we hope to see you at a reading soon. Thanks.